The heavy iron gates of St Lukas Orphanage Home creaked as a cold wind blew through them. Stella shivered, not just from the chill, but from the dull ache in her empty stomach. The sun had barely risen, but she was already awake, just like the other children, scrubbing the floors of the large but crumbling orphanage under the watchful eye of Miss Charity, the cruelest of all the matrons. Faster! Miss Charity barked, slapping her wooden cane against the wall. Do you think we have all day? The visitors will be here soon, and this place better look spotless. Stella swallowed her frustration and kept scrubbing. She had learned early on that defiance led to punishment, and punishment at St. Lukas was never mild. St. Lukas Orphanage Home was meant to be a sanctuary for children who had lost their families, but for those who lived there, it was more of a prison. The matrons treated them with no kindness, fed them just enough to keep them alive, and stole whatever visitors brought. The children were too scared to speak up, because anyone who did would suffer the consequences: severe beatings, locked up meals, or nights spent outside in the cold. As the morning wore on, a black car pulled up to the orphanage gates. The whispers started immediately. "It's Mr. Mike," one of the older boys whispered to Stella. "I heard he donates a lot of money." Stella had seen Mr. Mike before. He was a wealthy businessman who visited orphanages often, bringing food, clothes, and supplies. But like every other time, she knew they wouldn't get to enjoy any of it. Miss Charity's demeanor changed the moment Mr. Mike stepped out of his car. Her usual scowl twisted into a fake smile. "Mr. Mike," she called out in a sickly sweet voice. "What a pleasure to see you again." Mr. Mike, dressed in his usual sharp suit, shook her hand politely. "How are the children?" he asked, his keen eyes scanning the thin faces peeking from the windows. "Oh, they're wonderful, happy and well taken care of," Miss Charity lied effortlessly. Stella clenched her fists. If only he knew the truth. Mr. Mike's driver opened the car trunk, revealing crates of fresh fruits, bags of rice, box of new clothes, and even toys. The children's eyes widened, their mouths watering at the sight of the food. "Bring the children out," Mr. Mike instructed. Miss Charity hesitated for a moment, but forced a smile. "Of course." She clapped her hands. "Children, come and greet Mr. Mike." One by one, they stepped outside, forming a neat line. Stella could hear the excited whispers around her, but she knew better. She had been in St. Lukas for too long to expect anything good. Mr. Mike handed out small juice boxes and apples to the children. Stella held her apple carefully, not daring to bite into it yet. She could already feel Miss Charity's eyes on her, and sure enough, as soon as Mr. Mike turned his attention elsewhere, Miss Charity snatched the apple from her hand. "That's enough for now," she hissed. "The rest of the food will be stored." Stella watched helplessly as the other matrons took the crates inside. She knew they would keep the best for themselves and sell what they didn't need. The children would be lucky to get a spoonful of rice from those bags. After Mr. Mike left, the truth of the orphanage returned swiftly. "All of you, back inside," Miss Charity shouted. That evening, dinner was the same thin porridge they always received. No sign of the rice or fruit. Stella sat in silence, her stomach growling as she thought about the food locked away in the storage room. Mrs. Florence, one of the few kind-hearted teachers who visited occasionally, noticed Stella's downcast expression the next day. She pulled Stella aside after class. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked gently. Stella hesitated. If she told the truth, she could be punished. But she also knew that if she stayed silent, nothing would change. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "The children never get the food visitors bring. The matrons keep it for themselves." Mrs. Florence's eyes darkened. "Are you sure?" Stella nodded. "And if we try to take anything, we get punished." Mrs. Florence's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not right. I'll look into it." That evening, Mrs. Florence stayed later than usual. She waited until the matrons were busy in their quarters before sneaking into the storage room. What she found horrified her: shelves stocked with food, neatly folded clothes, and boxes of donated supplies that had never reached the children. The next morning, Mrs. Florence made a call. A few days later, Mr. Mike returned, this time with a team of inspectors. The matrons were caught off guard. They tried to cover their tracks, but it was too late. The inspectors found everything: unopened crates of donations, missing funds from orphanage accounts, and even testimonies from children brave enough to speak. Miss Charity protested. These children are liars. We take care of them as best we can. But Mr. Mike wasn't fooled. He turned to Stella. You were the first to speak up, weren't you? Stella's heart pounded, but she nodded. You're brave, Mr. Mike said. And because of you, things will change. Miss Charity and the other unruly matrons were removed from their positions, and a new management was put in place. Mrs. Florence was asked to oversee the orphanage, ensuring that every child was cared for properly. For the first time in years, Stella and the others were given full meals, new clothes, and the education they deserved. One evening, as Stella sat outside, watching the sunset, Mr. Mike approached her. You have a strong spirit, Stella, he said. I believe you deserve more than just a better orphanage. How would you like to come live with me? Tears welled in Stella's eyes. After years of suffering, she was finally being given a chance at a real family. I'd love that, she whispered. As she packed her things, ready to leave St. Lukas behind, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just Stella, the orphan. She was Stella, the girl who fought for change and won.